The floor was straw-covered dirt, the air heavy with smoke and sweat, and every corner whispered a story of survival or celebration. This was no ordinary bar. This was the medieval tavern, a melting pot of knights, farmers, bards, and even thieves. What made this chaotic hub of spilled drinks and louder voices the lifeblood of medieval communities. This is the evening you'll never forget. The door is heavier than you expected. The iron strap hinges groan, and as you push it open, the world inside the tavern crashes over you like a wave. The air hits first, thick with an earthy, smoky warmth, and the unmistakable tang of spilled ale mixed with sweat and unwashed wool. The floor isn't wooden, but hard-packed dirt, uneven underfoot, like it wants to remind you how far medieval life is from anything polished. You're standing half in and half out, lingering on the doorstep as the door swings shut behind you with a hollow thud. Congratulations, you've just stepped into the most chaotic room you've ever encountered. Voices, dozens of them, all shouting over one another, rise and fall in waves, sometimes breaking into sudden laughter or an angry murmur over in a shadowy corner. Everyone's talking, everyone's moving. There's no rhythm to it, no clear pattern, just a swirling mass of sound and motion that feels almost alive. And when you try and focus on one thread of the chatter, it's immediately swallowed by all the others, just loud enough to spike your adrenaline, yet just familiar enough to eventually settle into background noise. Welcome to the white noise machine of the medieval age. But then, the smells. It's overwhelming. It's like nothing you've ever encountered, yet somehow it fits the space. First, there's the ale. A sour, yeasty, slightly musty aroma hangs in the air, warm and heavy from mugs sloshing and barrels leaking. Then there's the smoke, a clue that the hearth, probably in the center of the room, is fed with damp wood tonight. It clings to every fabric in the room, swirling up and settling into the low thatched roof overhead. And the people, oh the people, leather cloaks soaked from the mud outside, coarse wool tunics stained with who knows what from long hours of labor. Maybe this combination would make sense individually, but together, it's an assault, a confusing mix of sour, salty, and smoky that somehow manages to warm the space like seasoning in a poorly cooked stew. The first thing you really notice as your eyes adjust is how dim it is in here. The firelight doesn't bounce around dramatically. Instead, it gets swallowed up by the low ceiling, the soot-blackened beams, and the uneven walls, leaving the distant corners of the room in a half-shadowed haze. There's barely enough light to spot faces, though they do catch the occasional flick of orange from the fireside. And speaking of faces, the room is absolutely packed, shoulder to shoulder at the tables, clustered around the bar, leaning against the walls, and even crouched close to the fire. It's as though every inch of this space has been claimed by a body. And you're awkwardly hovering near the doorway, shoes dragging uncomfortably over the dirt as you try to decide where to go, what to do, and if this place will swallow you whole. The right side of your ankle brushes an overturned piece of straw. Someone must have dragged it in. A few eyes flick toward you and then back away. You're not the first stranger to walk in here, clearly. And unless you make a nuisance of yourself, you probably won't be singled out either. The space seems to hum with its own pulse. Like everyone in the room understands the unspoken laws, that this is an open invitation for life at its rawest. The walls will hold your secrets, but only if you adapt quickly to the rhythm of the room. Let's take a moment here and actually break down this chaos. Taverns like this, especially in smaller towns, served as everything from a pub to a community meeting house. The uneven, almost haphazard design only reinforces that. It's not about style, it's about function. Low ceilings and dark woods were more practical than aesthetic, storing warmth while keeping decor simple enough to avoid damage from rowdy nights. Even the dirt floor serves a specific purpose. It's cheaper than stone or wood and absorbs messes more readily, though that's less about convenience and more about necessity. Over by the bar, the hearth glows brightest, fixed firmly in the heart of the room, both figuratively and literally. Fires like these offered more than just heat. They were the epicenter of everything the tavern represented. It's where food was prepared, where candles could be lit, and where the glow signaled others that warmth and life permeated a space. You can see its light catching on the faces closest to it. Farmers, probably, or at least folks dressed for hard work. Their boots are caked in mud turned thick by several days of rain, and they keep their elbows out wide as they laugh over thick, unevenly carved mugs. Looking closer, you notice the grains etched beneath their noses from years digging soil, the opposite of flashy, but unmistakably foundational. But not everyone here looks like they've come straight from the field. To one side, faint ornamentation pops out even in the dim light. A small silver brooch, the glint of better-kept leather boots, a cleaner neckline on a woolen shirt. There, leaning back with deliberate ease, is someone who carries the air of someone used to being served rather than serving. And yet, here they are, like the rest, huddled among the masses. This was the magic of the medieval tavern. It was the one place you could find nobility and commoners sharing a table, even if their reasons for being there ran worlds apart. Taverns weren't places to flaunt what made you different. They forced you to coexist, revealing instead how much you had in common after a bit of ale. Still, the space comes with its fair share of discomforts. Each shuffle you take further into the room feels extra deliberate, the ruts and ridges of the dirt floor putting you slightly off balance. But the heat's undeniable, steady and growing stronger with every step closer to the bar and the fiery heart of the room. For all its imperfections, there's warmth to this place. It draws you in even when much of your brain is begging you to step back outside into the clean, cold air. There's no going back though. Not here, not tonight. Even as you're surrounded by people, drinking, arguing, swapping jokes too crass to repeat, it's impossible to ignore the faint traces of organization. Taverns were often limited by size, but their spaces weren't as haphazard as they might seem. The packed seating, exposed beams, and intimate nooks allowed gatherings to feel smaller. A slight but effective way to manage such chaotic energy. Still, what they lacked in refined hospitality, they made up for in how thoroughly they embodied the spirit of their communities. If the town's heart had to be assigned to one place, it wouldn't have been the church or the town square. It would have been right here, within these four rough walls. And just look at the way people move. On one hand, they're entirely at odds, ducking around one another with sharp, tense jerks, murmuring half-hearted apologies as drinks slosh over already sticky cup rims. On the other hand, there's something seamless about the spatial dynamics, almost like a dance, with regulars knowing exactly how to slide past one another to grab bread crust or catch the barkeep's fleeting attention. You realize this crowd isn't an unruly mob. It's a well-oiled chaos machine. Eventually, the rhythms of the space begin to match your heartbeat. The heat no longer feels suffocating, and the noise starts to break itself into patterns of familiarity. Laughter over here, a hurried game of dice by the corner, occasional surges of friendly shouting toward the bar. Somewhere in the midst of it all, something shifts, and you realize the tavern is less sinister and more magnetic. This is medieval life boiled down to its barest essence. Every laugh, every smell, every shadowy corner is a reminder of how the walls hold far more than physical bodies. They hold all the color and chaos of a world you're only just stepping into. But who exactly are these people? This swirling mix of characters resting elbows across stained tabletops or clutching mugs far too tightly. What pulls them all together here under this low-hanging roof? Warmth, yes. Alcohol, obviously. But what deeper draw guides them here, colliding stories and lives with every hour's passing? The tavern is buzzing with people. And once you take a closer look, it's clear this crowd doesn't come from one story or background. Over there in the corner, sitting with a posture just stiff enough to give them away, is a knight. Their boots are splattered with dried mud, possibly from a battlefield, or maybe just from trekking a long rutted road. One arm rests on a rough wooden table, while the other cradles a drink, a heavy, poorly made mug that looks like it's been shared by more lips than just their own. Why is a knight spending their evening in a place like this? Simple. Camaraderie. Out there, life is formal, strict, disciplined. In here, those rules barely exist. This is where they come to laugh, drink, maybe brawl, and step away from the heavy weight of duty, if only until sunrise. But knights aren't the only ones who find respite here. At the opposite end of the room, there's a cluster of farmers, their hands visibly calloused, even in the dim firelight. You can tell they've spent hours bent over fields or leading stubborn oxen, but tonight they're gripping mugs instead of tools. One leans in close, recounting what sounds like a recent argument with a neighbor, and the others laugh, not necessarily at the story itself, but at the sheer relief of hearing someone else complain for once. Gossip is as much a form of currency in this room as the coins they occasionally pass to the barkeep. For these farmers, the tavern offers a temporary break from back-breaking labor. It's a chance to escape the monotony of their days, to trade stories instead of harvests, and maybe, just maybe, hear some exciting rumors that make their world feel a little bigger than the fields they know so well. And then there's the bard. You didn't notice them at first, and to be fair, that's probably how they wanted it. They're standing near the fireplace, half in shadow, tuning a battered stringed instrument that might be a lute or something less recognizable after years of wear. The bard doesn't stand tall or command the room in any obvious way, but when they speak or sing, everything shifts for a moment. Heads turn. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Their voice weaves through the noise like smoke slipping between cracks, catching attention without trying. They're here for simple reasons too. A warm meal, some coin tossed by appreciative or drunk listeners, and the safety of a roof over their head for the night. But more importantly, they're here because this is where stories thrive. Every medieval town had its legends, its scandals, its whispered rumors, and a bard knew exactly how to take those fragments and turn them into something unforgettable. The irony, of course, is that half the tales they sing about are pulled straight from places like this one, where real people inadvertently generate the very drama that keeps audiences captivated. Still, not everyone here has such straightforward intentions. See the small group huddled near the back wall, faces turned toward one another, just slightly more than toward their drinks. That's not camaraderie. That's caution. These might be thieves or pickpockets, sitting just on the fringe of the action, ready to pounce on an unguarded coin purse or a drunk patron who's had one too many. Taverns like this weren't just gathering places for the hard-working or high-spirited. They were magnets for anyone looking to exploit the chaos. And why wouldn't they be? The noise, the dim lighting, and the sheer press of bodies made it easy to slip in and out unnoticed, or at least without being pursued too far. Yet, here's the strange truth. Within this shared space, thieves and farmers could coexist for hours without trouble. This wasn't the time to settle scores or test someone's patience. If anything, stepping through the tavern door felt like entering an unspoken pact. Chaos was allowed, but outright hostility risked turning the entire room against you. What made this all so fascinating, and just a little unnerving, was how it blurred the lines between social classes. Look hard enough, and you might spot worn boots sitting just inches from polished ones. A noble who's ducked away from responsibilities at court for a night might find themselves sitting elbow to elbow with someone who spent the morning knee-deep in manure. Of course, the conversations they'd have were likely different, but the drinks they held might not be. It wasn't uncommon for a wealthier patron to insist on slightly better ale, but even that wasn't a guarantee. Once the tavern door closed behind you, the subtle cues of status and wealth meant less. Certain courtesies still existed, sure. The knight might choose not to sit directly alongside the common folk, and the noble might only be here out of curiosity or boredom. But there was no greater equalizer than a poorly poured pint, and the warm haze of alcohol served to smooth over the disparities, at least for a while. And then there were the women. Forget any expectations of prim, unobtrusive behavior. The women here, whether they were patrons, staff, or something in between, carried themselves with sharp-eyed confidence. A serving woman weaving skillfully between tables might hand out drinks while keeping an ear on the conversation closest to her. If someone got too bold with their attempts at flirtation, they might find themselves grabbing for their teeth instead of their drink. Yet, this wasn't hostility. It was a matter of balance. Women who frequented the tavern knew the space better than most of the men who stumbled in after dark. They could laugh loudly, flirt shamelessly, or settle arguments with the same ease they used to pass out mugs. If the tavern keeper ruled the bar, the women often ruled the floor. Suddenly, a small figure darts between legs, nearly colliding with a table on the way to the door. A child, likely one of several you hadn't noticed at first. While today's vision of a bar might exclude kids entirely, in a medieval tavern, their presence was almost ordinary. They moved like ghosts, dodging mugs and boots, and occasionally snatching a crust of bread or a shiny coin left carelessly near the edge of a table. No one seemed particularly startled by it. It was just part of the rhythm of the room, the way a cough or laugh might ripple through the space. The children kept to themselves, learning early how to make themselves useful or invisible. This mix of people, night-seeking camaraderie, farmers escaping labor, bards spinning tales, women navigating power dynamics, and even opportunistic thieves, created a world where the tavern wasn't just a location. It was an experience. It wasn't just about the ale or the warmth of the hearth. It was about the stories being written and rewritten in real time. Farmers leaning in conspiratorially to share rumors might turn those same whispers into fodder for a bard's next song. A thief might steal from someone at the bar and use the coins to fund a game of dice in the corner. The interactions didn't end in tidy conflict or resolution. They bled into one another, shaping the life of the community outside these four walls. One thing was certain. No two nights here were ever the same. Sure, there were patterns, farmers and their gossip, dice players and their cheating, the bard and their quiet preparations. But you could never tell when a spilled drink, a misheard boast, or an ill-timed laugh might send this delicate balance into full-blown chaos. The tavern was predictable in its unpredictability, chaotic, yet governed by unspoken rules that everyone seemed to understand instinctively or learn quickly. For now, you're just an observer, soaking it all in. This is medieval life stripped of ceremony and pride. Its people aren't polished or idealized. They're sweating, laughing, cheating, and shouting over one another in a space where survival and celebration mix as easily as spilled ale and straw. And yet, for all its rough edges, the tavern has a certain warmth to its chaos. It's a rare place, isn't it? Where the knight, the farmer, the bard, and even the thief can all exist under the same smoky roof, at least for one rowdy, unforgettable night. But enough watching from the fringes. There's something that matters even more than where you'll sit or who you'll meet. You need a drink, but getting to the bar in this swirl of humanity, that's a whole adventure in itself. You're standing there halfway into the chaos, and it dawns on you. Getting a drink is going to take some effort. The bar is straight ahead, a thick wooden plank propped up across a pair of barrels. It doesn't look much like a bar by modern standards, more like something hastily slapped together for the sole purpose of holding drinks. And right now, every inch of that makeshift surface is either sticky with splashes of ale or crowded with people leaning their elbows hard into it. Their voices form a ragged wall of overlapping shouts, orders, complaints, and jokes, loud enough to drown out even your thoughts. You take a hesitant step forward, then stop. No one's making room for you. If you want that drink, you'll have to work for it. Threading through the crowd is no small task. The floor is uneven, dried mud studded with straw that's been trampled into a dark, lumpy mat. Each step feels like a gamble. Are you going to trip on a loose patch of dirt? Or awkwardly bump someone who looks like they might take offense? It's hard to focus with people squeezing past you on both sides, many of them already unsteady on their feet. Someone jostles your arm as you edge forward, nearly sending you stumbling into a nearby table where a dice game is in full swing. The players barely glance up, too engrossed in their bets and laughter to care about your near miss. You steady yourself and push on, dodging what might be cider dripping from a tilted cup. Finally, you're close enough to the bar to feel the sticky heat emanating from it. It smells like spilled ale, damp wood, and sweat from all the bodies pressed so tightly together. The tavern keeper is behind the bar, a bulky figure with strong forearms and a face that betrays zero patience for nonsense. They move quickly, shoving mugs across the plank with well-practiced precision, rarely pausing to glance up. Just watching them, you can tell they've done this 1,000 times, maybe more. This isn't service with a smile. This is mechanical survival, a rhythm that keeps the whole place running. The problem, though, is getting noticed. The tavern keeper is surrounded. People on all sides yelling for more ale, waving coins, even slapping the bar to get attention. You open your mouth to add your voice to the mix, but hesitate. How loud do you need to be? Before you can decide, someone to your left lets out a bark of laughter and shouts for another round of the good stuff, slamming a fist on the wooden surface for emphasis. The tavern keeper sends them a withering glance, but reaches under the bar, pulling out another unevenly carved mug. The drink is poured with all the care of someone ladling soup for a line of soldiers. Quick, rough, and guaranteed to splash. You decide it's time to stake your claim. Sliding into the smallest available gap at the bar, you manage a quick, "1 ale, please." You're not even sure the words carried over the din, but the tavern keeper's eyes flick toward yours for a split second. It's enough to give you hope. As they shove another drink to a waiting patron, you notice the sheer efficiency of their work. Every movement is purposeful. They know exactly where to reach for the next mug, the next barrel, the next coin being thrown across the sticky bar. And when someone shouts a bit too aggressively, their attention snaps like a whip. One warning glance stops the offender mid-sentence. The tavern keeper isn't just running the bar, they're running the entire room. When your turn finally comes, the mug they push towards you is a little battered, the edges chipped, and there's a suspicious grain floating at the top of the ale. You sniff it cautiously. It smells yeasty, faintly sour, but not entirely unpleasant. The ale itself is unfiltered and unpasteurized, cloudy with bits of grain and yeast drifting lazily inside. This isn't craft beer, let's be clear. It's a batch of barley and water left to do what nature does best. And you don't ask questions about how long it's been sitting in the barrel. You just drink and hope. The first sip is warm, room temperature, which in this crowded tavern is closer to body temperature. The taste is heavy and a little bitter, but it hits a satisfying note somewhere between earthy and malty. You can't help but notice the texture, gritty and slightly rough. It's not something you'd savor so much as tolerate, which explains why the patrons around you don't seem too fussed. For most of them, the ale isn't about flavor, it's about function. It's something to sip on while they bark jokes, trade gossip, or stare blankly into their cups after a long day. If ale doesn't appeal, there are other options, though they're not much better. Mead, made from fermented honey, is sometimes available, offering a sweeter and much stronger kick than the ale. It's definitely not cheap, which makes it all the more popular for patrons who want to flaunt the fact that they can afford it. Then there's cider, made from pressed apples, which gives a sharp, tart bite that's arguably better for cutting through the taste of mud in your mouth after a roadside journey. It's particularly common in regions where apples grow more easily than barley. Wine exists too, but it's a rare luxury, heavily diluted with water, and typically reserved for wealthier drinkers. The majority of patrons here wouldn't dream of ordering it. Better to stick with what's affordable and plentiful. The bar itself tells a story of everyone who's passed through. The plank is uneven, with deep grooves carved into its surface, some from wear and tear, others from knives being slammed down in emphasis during countless arguments. One edge is noticeably darker, as though someone spilled an entire cask of ale there and decided against cleaning it. The residue only adds to the sticky, tacky feeling under your palms. You instinctively lift your hand, grimacing at the faint resistance as your skin pulls away from the wood. But it doesn't really matter. Nobody here expects cleanliness, least of all the tavern keeper. Speaking of the tavern keeper, they're far more than just someone who pours drinks. Watching them work, you start to understand their role as the unofficial referee for everything that happens in the tavern. The shouting competition happening at one end of the room, it quiets the moment the keeper's gaze settles on it. The sudden scuffle breaking out near the fire. A quick word from the bar, and one of the participants sheepishly backs down. It's as if the chaos of the room bends ever so slightly around this one commanding figure. Their authority is absolute, not because anyone elected them, but because the alternative is a bar fight so loud it might attract the constable, a scenario nobody wants. The tavern keeper's memory is almost unsettling. Coins clink onto the bar in a steady stream, and somehow they keep track of who's paid what without ever pulling out a ledger. You see someone try to walk away without settling their tab, But before they reach the door, the keeper's voice cuts through the noise like a blade. Low, firm, and loud enough to make everyone pause. The would-be freeloader stops, mutters an apology, and digs out a handful of coins that probably weren't easy to come by. Order is restored without anyone getting clobbered, though it's clear the tavern keeper wouldn't hesitate if things got out of hand. You take another sip of your ale, the gritty texture now feeling oddly familiar, almost comforting. Around you, people continue shouting over one another, throwing elbows to get closer to the bar, raising half-empty mugs in toast to nothing in particular. The atmosphere hums with collective energy, a mix of frustration, camaraderie, and sheer willpower to carve out some kind of joy in an otherwise brutal world. Every fight, every laugh, and every spilled drink gets absorbed back into the rhythm of the tavern, like it was meant to happen that way. Finally, with your drink in hand, you step back from the bar, feeling both relieved and triumphant, as if you've survived a rite of passage just by making it this far. But now comes the real question. What do you do next? Looking around the room, your options range from joining a dice game to listening in on the bard's tales by the fire. Whatever you choose, one thing's certain. You won't be sitting quietly. Not here, near the hearth, tucked into the liveliest corner of the room, stands the bard. At first, they seem almost unimpressive, more like a wanderer who stumbled into the crowd than someone about to steal its attention. Their clothes are worn, the hem of their cloak frayed from countless miles on the road. But it isn't the outfit that sets them apart. It's their presence. They don't compete with the shouting and laughter surrounding them. No, they simply wait, calmly tuning their lute, letting the small, hesitant notes slip into the air like breadcrumbs scattered in a forest. The shift is subtle but immediate. People start turning toward them, little by little, and then it happens. A chord rings out clean and steady, cutting through the noise with a simple, undeniable power. Somehow, against all the chaos, the room begins to settle. Everything about this bard seems built for moments like this. The way their fingers move across the strings, creating melodies that feel as raw and untamed as the room itself. It's not just music. It's a steady thread pulling everyone into the same rhythm. By the time their deep, slightly gravelly voice joins the melody, there's no mistaking it. The bard has the crowd now. Conversations fade, hands still mid-toast, and a new kind of hush spreads. Not silence exactly, but a quieter energy. Even the rowdiest patrons are now leaning slightly forward, hanging on to the melody, the tone, the unraveling story born from their chords. The first tale is simple enough. A ballad of a knight whose deeds sound suspiciously grandiose. Something about taming dragons and rescuing damsels in distress. You'd think the crowd around you would scoff at it. After all, this knight sounds more absurd than gallant. But that's the thing about stories here. The line between truth and fiction couldn't matter less. These tales aren't for dissecting. They're for feeling. And when the bard's voice cracks just slightly on the final verse, painting an image of a lone horseman riding off into the fog, the crowd erupts. Cheers, some mocking, some genuine, blend with the stomping of boots on packed dirt. But the bard doesn't linger. They transition smoothly into another tune, this one plucking at a more familiar thread. It starts with a knowing glance toward a group of farmers near the fire, a glance that says, "This one's for you." The next tale isn't about knights or dragons. It's about a harvest gone hilariously wrong, involving a runaway cart, a goat, and some very inconvenient mud. The farmers laugh, elbowing one another, as if to say, "That's just like old Edgar last spring. It's not a famous story by any stretch. You get the sense the bard stitched this one together from bits of gossip overheard in places just like this. But that's the brilliance of it. These aren't just their stories, they're our stories, hilarious, messy, and oddly comforting. The bard's voice rises and falls effortlessly, weaving between humor, sorrow, and outright absurdity as the night unfolds. One tale describes a tragic love where two star-crossed lovers ended up meeting in the wrong haystack. Another is a boastful recount of how a patron's cousin definitely wrestled a bear, but only after 3 barrels of cider. And while it's clear to anyone who's paying attention that most of this is nonsense, nobody seems to care. Because in this smoky, dimly lit room, the truth isn't the point. The point is connection. Boasts were transformed into ballads, and everyday mishaps were elevated to the status of myth, creating a shared cultural experience. The bard doesn't just tell stories, they pull the room into them. And for a few minutes at least, the whole tavern breathes as one. The firelight flickers across the bard's face as they pause to retune their lute. It's a brief moment, but even that seems deliberate, letting the crowd stew in anticipation for just a few seconds. Someone hollers for the one about Sir Geoffrey's cat, while another voice demands the tale of a ship that vanished in a storm. You won't believe this, but you overhear someone muttering to a friend, beginning their own rambling story while the bard resets. It's as though the performance has unlocked something primal in the room, where everyone feels an itch to contribute. The bard smiles, maybe at the absurdity of it all, before diving into something older, something slower. This song is different. It drips with melancholy, telling the story of a nameless warrior who fought for a kingdom no one remembers. The words are sparse, almost whispered, and the lute's melody is low, throbbing like a heartbeat. This time, there's no laughing, no yelling. The crowd leans closer. You can practically feel the weight of the words settle onto the room, heavy like the benches beneath you. It's a tale of loss, of how no one mourned the unknown soldier, and suddenly the laughter from earlier feels very far away. When the bard sings the final note, the room exhales as one, quietly, cautiously, like breaking the spell might shatter something fragile. And it might, because for a moment, the whole crowd shared not just a story, but a burden. That's the gift of a bard, a way to transform a chaotic, drunken gathering into something more. As the stories continue, you start to notice how the faces around you shift with each tale. The knight near the window, silent all evening, cracks the faintest smile during a ballad about a battle that sounds suspiciously made up. The farmers break into raucous laughter at a joke clearly aimed at their expense. Even the shady figures in the far corner, the ones who've spent most of the night whispering among themselves, can't help but grin when the bard cheekily calls them out for misplacing a lord's coin purse. Everyone here is part of the act, whether they realize it or not. They're all building the atmosphere, layering their reactions into the bard's performance like instruments in an orchestra. In a time when books were rare and entertainment wasn't something you could summon with the click of a button, the bard played an irreplaceable role. They were entertainers, yes, but also historians, gossips, and sometimes even therapists. Their ballads might save a memory from slipping into obscurity, or they might twist that memory into something almost unrecognizable, something grander, funnier, or more tragic. Either way, the stories they shared became anchors, binding people to their neighbors, their community, and even their past. Storytelling was a deeply ingrained tradition within medieval taverns, serving as a means of connection and a way to forge social bonds. Every yarn they spun, every note they strummed, was another thread stitched into the shared tapestry of the room. By the end of the bard's performance, the energy in the tavern isn't quite the same as before. There's still laughter, still shouting, but there's also something quieter humming beneath it all. A feeling of warmth that goes beyond the firelight. The bard, now nursing their own mug of ale by the hearth, looks almost ordinary again. The stories are done, the songs finished, and yet their impact lingers. For a brief time, the crowd didn't just escape their lives. They shared them, reshaped them, and found joy or healing in the process. It's hard to say how much of what you've heard tonight will last until morning. Maybe some of it will live on in memory, the way good stories do. Or maybe, by tomorrow, it'll all dissolve into the general haze of one more night in a medieval tavern. For now, though, the bard has done their job. They've given the room what it didn't even realize it was missing. A shared moment of escape in a world that doesn't offer many. The bard's performance was a momentary escape from the hardships of medieval life. And in this space, where broken mugs and bruised egos are just as common as laughter, that's no small feat. But as the room shifts back to its usual rhythm of noise and motion, you can't help but notice where the attention goes next. The bard might be resting, but another corner of the room is gathering energy. The sound of clinking coins and dice echoes faintly, followed by a cheer loud enough to rival even the bard's best ballad. Because in a medieval tavern, not all entertainment is poetic. Some of it comes with risk, reward, and plenty of laughter. Here's the thing about gambling in a medieval tavern. It wasn't just about the games themselves. It was about what they represented. A roll of the dice wasn't just a test of luck. It was a spark that lit up small pockets of camaraderie and competition. Over at a corner table, a group of men are crowded together, leaning hard on elbows and clutching worn coins in sweaty palms. At the center of the group, a pair of dice clatters across the wooden surface, bouncing over a scratch in the grain before landing with a muted thud. For a moment, everything slows. Heads tilt inward, eyes locked on the outcome. And then, cheers erupt. Someone, a farmer judging by the state of their tunic, pounds the table in triumph and scoops the humble winnings into a pouch at his side. That pouch, by the way, is suspiciously light. Winning here isn't about luxury. It's about scraping together enough to call the night a success. Some patrons bet coins, shiny and dull alike. Others toss in favors, like a round of drinks for the table or a week of shared labor in the fields. Then there are the higher stakes games. Ones where an unlucky roll might cost a goat, chicken, or even your dignity, which someone near the bar seems dangerously close to losing. The games were, in essence, a gamble with a person's purse, their pride, and possibly their pants. If that sounds dramatic, well, in the high-energy atmosphere of the tavern, everything feels dramatic. Now, cheating. It's not just a possibility, it's an expectation. Everyone here knows it's happening, but no one talks about it directly. That would spoil the fun. At a table near the wall, a pair of hands moves almost too smoothly. Dice dip low as if in slow motion before landing perfectly. A little too perfectly. Suspicious whispers ripple outward as the unlucky players share fleeting, knowing glances. Do they challenge it? Maybe. But accusing someone of cheating in this environment takes guts, because you'd better be ready to back it up. Cheating, after all, is part of the craft, a skill, as much as anything else. The patrons who excel at it typically know when to press their luck and when to back off, blending their moves so seamlessly that even the losers can't quite make themselves angry about it. But not all cheating is subtle. There's another table over by the fire where things have taken a turn. Voices rise, chairs scrape loudly against the floor, and words like rigged and marked cards are exchanged just loudly enough to catch the whole room's attention. This table has been playing cards, simple games made more complicated by the constantly shifting rules, which seem to bend and blur as the mood dictates. Accusations fly, but they're tossed more like smirking challenges than actual fights. In this moment, pride is the currency being wagered, not just coins. Most of the patrons fall into laughter before long, but the tension hangs in the air, lingering like the smoke from the fire. The games themselves are fluid too, ranging from straightforward dice games to more inventive shows of endurance or strength. On one side of the room, a group of patrons has abandoned rolling dice in favor of seeing who can down the most ale without keeling over. There aren't any defined prizes except for bragging rights, and maybe a sore head the next morning, but the cheering, groaning, and occasional hiccuping keep the crowd entertained. Beyond the main games, side contests like arm wrestling and thumb wars provided additional entertainment. But it's the drinking contests that always seem to draw the loudest laughs, as people teeter on the edge of collapsing straight into their neighbor's lap. Even the dice themselves tell a story. They're often carved from bone or wood, uneven and battered from years of use, but somehow satisfying in their imperfection. Every roll comes with a tangible texture, the clunk of a die tipping over against its will, landing on a surface that's seen a lifetime of spills and hurried scratches. The sound alone hooks something deep in your chest, where tension coils and twists, until the scratch of wood on wood announces the result. All at once the crowd reacts, a burst of groans, a cheer that cuts sharply through the air, or the occasional resigned mutter, "Not my night." The stakes weren't always huge, but they felt big to the people playing. Losing your last few coins in a game of dice might mean skipping supper tomorrow, an unsettlingly real possibility. Winning, however, could make you the center of attention for a while, buying enough rounds that even the losers forget their frustrations. And here's the twist. None of this was ever just about the prizes. The games were as much about the shared experience as they were about the winnings. Every laugh across the table or pointed look at a suspicious roll reinforced the fragile balance of friendship and rivalry brewing beneath the surface. That balance, of course, could break. Games had their way of veering into heated arguments, a misplaced coin here, an errant insult there. Yet, just as tensions rose to boiling point, you'd hear a loud cough, followed by silence. The tavern keeper, who had been wiping a mug with exaggerated calm, suddenly locks eyes with the offending table. No words are necessary. Everyone grudgingly backs down, muttering apologies under their breath as the energy in the room fizzles back into its usual buzz. The tavern keeper served as the referee, maintaining order and preventing the games from escalating into full-blown brawls. Without this figure overseeing the chaos, you get the feeling the walls would have trouble holding the scene together. Somehow, even when games went too far, the rhythms of the tavern absorbed the fallout. A player who loses too much might slink back into the shadows for a few drinks, pretending the room isn't watching. A big winner, on the other hand, might rush to buy a round before anyone questions how they won. Either way, the moments of tension dissolve. It's just the nature of the tavern. A player can leave the table bitter, but they'll leave knowing exactly where to find the same group next week. And chances are, their luck will be a little better next time, if only because someone else will be bold enough to cheat louder. Games like these meant more than cheap thrills in a dimly lit room. They mirrored the broader realities of medieval life, where chance controlled much of what happened to you. The games of chance, with their inherent unpredictability, mirrored the broader uncertainties of medieval life. Losing a bet in a tavern wasn't so different from dealing with a failed crop or an unexpected storm. In both cases, you got what you got, and all you could do was make the best of it. Gambling distilled this reality into something so simple, so immediate, that everyone in the room felt its pull. The highs could be dizzying, the lows could leave you reeling. But most nights, the outcome hardly mattered. What stuck was the laughter, the shared frustration, and the impossible hope carried in every roll of the dice. By now, the air around the tables is thick with noise. Cheers mix with groans, coins clink faintly in the background, and someone standing near the fire starts loudly retelling a play-by-play of their recent victory, adding more flair with every word. Even as the games reach their crescendo, the unspoken rhythm of the tavern never wavers. From gamblers testing their luck to bystanders enjoying the drama, this corner of the room hums with life, equal parts risk, reward, and chaos. It's hard to tell when exactly one game wraps up and another begins, but that's part of the magic. The flow is seamless, as if the tavern itself is driving the event forward. Eventually, as the night goes on, the energy shifts. The cheers soften, the accusations of cheating turn half-hearted, and the coins move slower across the tables. Gamblers begin drifting back into the broader mix of the tavern, their empty mugs catching the light of the dying fire. What's left in their place is something different, not quite quiet, but more subdued. The tavern starts to feel less like a roaring beast and more like a living thing catching its breath. The games may be over, but the night, not quite yet. Out of the corner of your eye, you notice something else starting to take hold. A sort of restless sparking energy that seems to ripple toward the center of the room. Because when the drinks keep coming and the brawls start brewing, things can change quickly. And that's what's next. As the night drags on, the tavern's energy begins to shift. The air grows heavier, not just with smoke and the sour warmth of spilled drinks, but with something less tangible. A rawness brought on by alcohol, exhaustion, and fading inhibitions. Conversations that started as quiet murmurs now echo loudly across the room. A laugh, exaggerated and far too boisterous, breaks through the noise. Somewhere near the hearth, a mug hits the ground with a clatter, quickly followed by a sharp, muttered apology. It's not just louder now, it's looser, less predictable. Every moment seems poised on the edge of something unexpected. Part of this shift comes from the patrons themselves. Many arrive tired, shoulders heavy with the burdens of the day, but several mugs of ale have done their work. Good judgment has thinned out noticeably. Over by the bar, a farmer slams his drink down just a little too hard, turning to a nearby stranger with the kind of friendly laugh that feels more like a challenge. You watch as the stranger glances around, checking, perhaps, how much of the room is paying attention, before leaning in, mirroring the laugh. And this, in its own strange way, is how things often go. A bar fight in the Middle Ages was not a rare occurrence. It starts with small sparks like this one, a poorly timed joke, a nudge that lands with just a bit too much force, or the unmistakable pang of jealousy when someone notices their companion laughing too hard at the bard's jokes. Tables become their own theatres. At one, near the centre, two men are leaning closer and closer, faces flushed with heat that's probably half ale, half bravado, while a few others look on, ready to intervene or to cheer, depending how things unfold. Then one of them, the larger of the two, makes a wild swing but misses completely, spinning slightly before crashing into an innocent bystander's bench. For a split second, no one moves. You'd think this would be the moment the room erupts into chaos, but somehow it doesn't. Instead, the crowd erupts into laughter, not malice, but the hearty type of laughter that rings out when people realize they're watching something so ridiculous it could only happen here. These brawls were often more comedic than deadly, the kind where participants swing wildly, miss, trip, and land in someone's dinner. Nearby, someone spits stew through their nose from laughing too hard. The tavern keeper, of course, is already moving before things can escalate. One sharp word, barked out over the clamour, and both men immediately stumble apart, muttering half apologies while rubbing at their already bruising egos or elbows. The keeper isn't holding a weapon, but she may as well be. With one deep scowl and a ladle now firmly in hand, she squashes the brawl before it's gotten any momentum. She knows how to maintain order in a place like this, where smacks to pride often land harder than smacks to the face. Meanwhile, in another corner, the night's flirtations are testing their own limits. For some, it's going surprisingly well. You spot a pair laughing together over shared mugs of ale, their heads tilted toward one another conspiratorially, as if the rest of the room has melted away. But across the tavern, things are far less graceful. A man leans across a bench toward a woman holding an empty tray. He's probably trying to impress her, though any charm he might have been aiming for is ruined by the clumsy slur of his compliment. "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth." Her response is swift, sharp, and deeply entertaining. The end of the wooden tray smacks against his chest, more playful than painful, but enough to send the surrounding group into fits of laughter. It's one thing to flirt in a medieval tavern. Leaving without a bruised ego, or something worse, is another entirely. For some women here, especially those working within the tavern, these advances are just part of the evening's rhythm. It was common to deal with would-be poets, arm wrestlers, and one man who tries to impress you by balancing a knife on his nose. The responses vary. There's a quick wit behind most of them, capable of cutting down the most persistent suitor. But not every flirtation ends in rejection. Over by the hearth, a baker's daughter, her cheeks warming slightly from the combined effects of the fire and her companion's stumble of a joke, leans forward, her laughter spilling easily into his. A shy baker's daughter and a travelling stonemason sharing a laugh over stew might seem like a small moment, but it's the kind of memory that could ripple far beyond tonight. Jealousy, predictably, flares just as easily as flirtation. Near the bard's makeshift stage, a man lurking in the shadows suddenly snaps into full focus, his jaw tightening when he spots his companion, likely his wife, laughing a little too enthusiastically at some bard's cheeky aside. You don't even realize there's about to be a confrontation until it's already begun. He storms up, towering over the seated woman, firing off a low, cutting phrase you can't quite hear. She doesn't respond with words. Instead, a piece of stale bread arcs gracefully through the air and smacks against his chest, drawing a chorus of cheers from nearby tables. This, naturally, only escalates things. For a moment, it looks like the bread might be joined by an entire mug. But before anyone can toss anything further, the tavern keeper breaks through again. This time, it's with nothing more than a disapproving grunt. The room takes the hint before anything more dramatic can unfold. The brawls and banter are just part of what keeps the energy alive even as the night stretches further toward dawn. Moments of connection still cut through the madness. Take the farmers near the bar, for instance. At the start of the night, they were strangers, sitting at opposite ends of the room and nursing separate mugs of weak cider. Now, two drunk farmers bonding over a mutual hatred of turnips has become a spectacle of its own, complete with passionate recountings of turnip-related misfortunes and promises to never farm the things again. Their laughter is loud, sharp, unrestrained, and by the time any of this would make sense to an outside observer, both men are already backslapping companions. As the hours tick by, the rhythms of the room begin to shift again. The energy that peaked with the arguments, flirting, and fights begins to fade. The laughter still rings out, but it's slower now, tinged with exhaustion rather than freshness. The chairs scraping against the packed dirt floor grow fewer, replaced by the shuffling of feet from patrons searching for a quiet corner to sit or kneel until the world stops spinning. The bard's lute has been set aside, their earlier performance feeling like something from a much earlier time in the evening. Even the games of chance have quieted, the players now too tired to call out for one more roll or risk one more bet. This is the quieter chaos, the kind of noise that settles into your bones and lets you know the night has mostly run its course. But it's not over yet, not entirely. A stray shout still erupts now and then, joined by the occasional thud as another overambitious drinker meets the floor. Yet even these moments feel slower, more predictable, as the fire in the hearth burns lower and the cold begins to creep in from the outside. By now, it's clear. Even the chaos of the tavern has a rhythm, one that can't rage all night without eventually softening into something else. You glance around the room, noticing that the bodies once leaning forward in tension are beginning to sag backward with weariness. The faces that had flushed red with shouts or laughter have dulled to faint grins or distant stares. The cracks of raw medieval energy are still present, fights, flirting, and all. But they're quieter now, more tired. Even this world, wild and unpredictable as it feels, needs to rest eventually. And now, as the fire burns low, the night takes on a quieter tone. The energy in the room has finally ebbed. The voices that once roared with laughter and shouted over disagreements are now subdued to tired murmurs or silenced entirely. Even the bard, who once commanded the focus of the room, sits with their back against the hearth, their lute resting on the floor beside them, untouched since their last song. Around you, the once lively tavern begins its slow transformation into something else entirely, a crowded makeshift sleeping space where exhaustion reigns supreme. It starts subtly, with a head slumping forward onto crossed arms at a table. The person might have tried to fight the pull of sleep for a moment, blinking hard as if that would keep it away. But the ale, the warmth, and the deep weariness of whatever long day led them here win out. They don't even bother to lean back in their chair, just collapse right where they sit, mumbling something incomprehensible before slipping into the stillness of unconsciousness. It's not graceful, but it's efficient, and no one around them seems to notice or care. This isn't the kind of place where people judge you for falling asleep at a table surrounded by dirty mugs and crumbs of stale bread. For others, the draw of comfort, or what passes for comfort here, is too strong to stay upright. Slowly, one by one, patrons begin to shift toward the floor. Some stretch out right there in front of their tables, brushing aside what little straw remains scattered across the dirt in hopes of fashioning something vaguely softer. A few have blankets, though blanket might be a generous term for the thin, faded scraps of cloth they pull over themselves. Others make do with cloaks or, when desperate enough, no covering at all. They lay fully clothed, boots still strapped on, while one hand often rests protectively over a bag or pouch. Sleeping among strangers means you can never be too cautious. The straw underfoot, meant to absorb much of the grime and muck tracked in during the day, doesn't offer much in the way of luxury. It's thin, unevenly scattered, and far from clean. The standard sleeping surface was a straw-stuffed mattress, but here there's not even the pretense of a mattress, just loose stalks roughly spread across the hard-packed dirt. You shift slightly, testing the thought of lying down yourself, and immediately regret it. The straw crunches underfoot with a sound that's somehow both sharp and damp, and the cold dirt below it promises no real comfort. Still, for these patrons, even a lumpy, itch-inducing bed of straw beats the danger of the roads at night. Out there, anything could happen. Bandits, wolves, or a twisted ankle on an unlit path. In here, at least, there's warmth and somewhere to rest your head. The tension of sleeping amid strangers hangs heavy over the room. At one end of the tavern, a man is still wide awake, sitting with his back pressed firmly to the wall. His eyes dart carefully around the room, flickering over every movement. Whether he's worried about his coin purse being snatched or simply too unsettled to close his eyes in such close quarters with so many others, it's hard to say. But his dagger, resting not so subtly on his lap, suggests he's ready for either scenario. He's not the only one who keeps a weapon close. Elsewhere, you notice the faint glint of a blade slipped under someone's chest as they curl up, almost like a crude, uneven pillow. Despite this caution, there's a strange kind of unspoken trust here too. No one is outright hostile. The atmosphere isn't one of fear, just of careful awareness. Maybe it's because the tavern itself feels like a protective cocoon. The tavern keeper, ever watchful even as the night stretches on, still makes their rounds. Their presence keeps even the rowdiest patron from trying anything too bold. It's a fragile but steady balance, where the shared understanding of what this space represents keeps things from escalating. For most, it's enough to let sleep come a little easier. The flickering firelight plays across the room, casting dancing shadows that make the sleeping forms on the floor look like something from a half-remembered dream. The fire is lower now, having burned down to a soft, steady glow, more orange than red. Someone shifts closer to the hearth, pulling their blanket, or maybe just their coat, tighter around their shoulders to block out the creeping chill from the rest of the room. The smell of smoke is sharper now, more concentrated as the hearth reaches the last stages of its nightly song, but it works its way into the fabric of the tavern as naturally as the creaking of the beams overhead. And then there's the noise, or perhaps more accurately, the lack of it. The tavern never falls silent, of course. Silence isn't in its nature, but the noise changes. Shouts and raucous laughter have given way to softer sounds. The occasional snore cutting through the room, someone muttering in their sleep just a little too loudly, the gentle rustle of straw as bodies shift against it. Every so often, a log pops in the fire, cracking with enough force to make you jump, though no one else stirs. Somewhere in the rafters, a noise echoes faintly. A fart, just loud enough to draw a stifled chuckle from the one person still awake enough to notice. It's not the most glamorous of lullabies, but somehow all these sounds blend together into something rhythmic, steady. It's the kind of white noise that makes even the roughest sleeping conditions feel slightly more bearable. Not everyone has made it to the floor, of course. On the far side of the room, a young figure has collapsed onto a bench, their legs dangling awkwardly over one end, while their head tips back, mouth slightly ajar. The position looks anything but comfortable, yet they're utterly still, proof that exhaustion can overcome even the hardest wooden planks. Under one of the tables, two figures are curled up, using each other's backs as makeshift support. Whether they arrived together or found each other purely out of necessity tonight is anyone's guess. But they sleep in tandem now, almost synchronized in their slow, shallow breathing. The practical reasons for staying here overnight are painfully clear. For most of these patrons, it's not just about convenience, it's about survival. For those unable to afford a room or too drunk to reach one, sleeping on a bench under a table or near the hearth was a common reality. Roads at night were unpredictable at best, dangerous at worst. Traveling even a modest distance in the dark was a risk that few were willing to take, even if it meant enduring the lumpy, freezing discomfort of this communal sleeping arrangement. And for those who might have otherwise sought out proper lodgings, the financial strain of the day's gambling losses, or the staggering cost of a single mug too many, has left them with few other options. The tavern, for all its flaws, is the best they're going to get tonight. Time stretches strangely here. The hours lose their hard edges, blending into each other as the fire shrinks further into a faint glow. Despite the restless shuffling of bodies and the occasional late-night cough that cuts through the quiet, the tavern begins to feel calmer. It's not peace exactly, but something close, like the moment after a heavy storm when the wind finally dies down, leaving only the steady drip of water through cracks in the roof. And maybe that's just it. The tavern isn't peaceful, but it is comforting in its own way. A shared space where everyone accepts, without question or ceremony, the intimacy of sleeping shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Despite the lack of comfort and hygiene, the fire provided some warmth, and the tavern keeper's presence offered a degree of safety. This was the strange, enduring charm of the medieval tavern. For all its noise and chaos, for all its discomfort, it worked. People shared stories, laughter, arguments, and eventually, even this quiet lull of exhaustion. All of it existed under the same thatched roof, wrapped in the smells of smoke and ale, surrounded by the whistle of the cold wind outside. And now, as the first light of dawn creeps in, you wake up to the sharp chill of morning air slipping through the cracks in the tavern walls. There's an ache in your back from the uneven dirt floor, and your neck reminds you why packed straw is a poor substitute for a pillow. The muffled sounds of the waking world outside bleed faintly into the room. A crow's call, the distant creak of a wagon wheel, boots squelching in the mud. But inside the tavern, things feel heavier. The air is cold now, made even sharper by the lingering damp of extinguished bodies and the smoky remnants of the hearth. Your breath clouds slightly in front of your face before vanishing into the dim, still shadows. The fire is nearly gone. All that's left are smouldering embers and a faint curl of smoke hanging lazily above the hearth. Even the colors have drained from the room. What was once alive with the orange glow of firelight and the deep hues of ale now feels washed out. Greys, browns and shadows. The faint light of dawn leaks in through slivers in the wooden shutters, casting streaks onto tables littered with overturned mugs and broken bread crusts. You blink hard, clearing the fog of half-sleep from your mind, and notice the faint crunch under your sleeve where it scrapes straw. Damp, sticky, And faintly itchy, the straw seems to cling to everything, likely stealing a bit of the smells from the night before. Warm ale sweat, and smoke mingling with the earthy chill of the dirt floor. Across the room, the tavern keeper is already moving, their figure outlined briefly as they pass near the largest crack of window light. A broom made of simple, knotted bristles scrapes across the floor, disturbing straw and pushing it into lazy piles. The sound cuts through the silence with an almost grating rhythm, deliberate enough to serve as a wake-up call for the room's stragglers. It's not subtle, and it's certainly not kind. A rhythm as practical and no-nonsense as the person wielding it. Every scrape of wood against dirt seems to say the same thing. Get moving. The smell of smoke flares faintly as ashes swirl up each time the broom strikes near the hearth, reminding you once again of the fire's warmth just hours ago. You glance around and notice the others beginning to stir. A farmer near the hearth mutters something incoherent, rubbing his face with both hands as if he could wipe away the rough weight of the night. His cloak slips from his shoulder as he sits up, its edges stiff and muddy from what was probably another night of fieldwork before stepping in here. Across the room, someone else, likely a merchant, given the faint insignia embroidered on their tunic, shifts upright with a groan. They reach for their pack, hand trembling faintly, and fumble for what's likely been their one prized possession for the night, their coin purse, tucked tightly under the folds of their tunic like a hidden talisman. It's a small ritual, one echoed by several others around the room, all subtly patting at pockets or checking belongings with sudden awareness. The tavern keeper doesn't so much as look up, focused instead on their endless list of tasks. First, it's the hearth. They grab a poker and scrape at the remnants of last night's fire, the metallic clang of iron on stone ringing out before the gentle rush of ashes gives it an almost muffled quality. Next, they're pulling a pot, likely pottage, back onto the warmth of the embers in preparation for whatever patrons might linger into the breakfast hours. The thick smell of reheated stew begins to creep into the air, a soothing mix of herbs and staleness that feels both comforting and vaguely unappetizing, depending on how much ale is still swirling in your stomach. You notice someone exchanging quiet words with the tavern keeper, sliding a few coins over the bar. In turn, they're handed a mug. Not ale this time, judging by its watery texture. It's little more than a half-hearted attempt at cider or possibly watered-down wine. A cheap and functional way to shake off the grogginess of the morning. A couple of others take note and wander over, boots shuffling in uneven steps. One of them, a short, scruffy-haired man, leans far too casually against the bar, his head sagging slightly before jerking back upright. His voice comes out rough, scratchy, and entirely too loud for the quiet of the room. Anything left strong enough to kick this headache out? The tavern keeper doesn't answer, handing him the same watery brew as the others with a raised brow that says, "This is all you're getting. Take it or leave it." The room feels smaller now. The press of bodies from the night before is gone, leaving only pockets of the lingering few who were either too drunk or too exhausted or too broke to leave when the fire still roared. What remains is a patchwork scene of shared regret and quiet recovery. A woman wipes at the edge of her face with the tattered sleeve of her dress, pulling tiny bits of straw out of her hair. The youth slumped over the corner bench hasn't even moved. His mouth is still slightly ajar, and you half wonder if anyone will bother to wake him before the town fully springs to life. His empty mug, now stuck to some questionable stain on the bench beside him, gives a telling hint of why he's still there. What stands out most in this moment is the quiet. The tavern that was once deafeningly loud is now filled with softer, reflective noises. The rustle of footsteps on straw, the occasional grunt of someone stretching a stiff limb, the clang of a broom against a mug that escaped the cleanup. Even the conversations, sparse as they are, seem quieter. Muted exchanges punctuated by a short laugh or a groan. Roommates from the dirt floor share tired recollections of the night, retelling moments that are no doubt already evolving into something larger, something exaggerated. The stories from the night before are already changing, every spill becoming more dramatic, every fight edging closer to being titled the best brawl you've ever seen. You catch one farmer boasting about a dice roll that supposedly won him a fortune, though the jingling of his pouch suggests otherwise. For the tavern keeper, the rhythm of the morning feels like a push against the weight of the night before, undoing one layer of chaos to prepare for the next. They scrub at the bar with practiced resignation, scrubbing the sticky residue of spilled drinks and dropped stew with a rag that seems to have seen better days. You can tell this isn't just a job to them. It's a performance, a constant battle to keep the space from devolving entirely, even while it operates exactly as intended. The tavern keeper's actions reflect the practicalities of preparing for another day of service. With each task, they restore order just enough to keep the delicate ecosystem of the tavern functioning. As you gather your things, a cloak crumpled to one side, a pouch of coins that somehow hasn't been touched. You glance around one final time. You feel the pull of the space differently now. The chaos of last night felt like being caught in something bigger than yourself, better or worse. But now, in this quiet moment, you start to see how it all fits together. The tavern isn't simply a place to drink. It's the heart of something far larger, a space where the rules of medieval life blur, if only briefly. People who'd never crossed paths on the street end up sleeping side by side here. Previously distant strangers, now bound by shared jokes, songs and bruises. It's connection, even in its messiest, most imperfect form. And it lingers, even as the fire burns lower and the tavern keeper's broom sweeps closer to where you stand. Tugging your cloak tighter, you step toward the door, boots crunching softly on the straw-covered floor. The morning's cold air is about to meet you, but you hesitate, glancing back one last time. The tavern is still here, still alive in its own quiet way, as people prepare to step into a new day. And as you push open that heavy wooden door, you carry with you the faint, smoky echoes of what happened within these walls. The tavern door groans as it swings shut behind you, the familiar weight of its wood fading as the morning air washes over your face. It's crisp, sharp enough to cut through the lingering haze of sleep and ale. For a moment, you just stand there, adjusting to the quiet. The difference is startling. Inside was all heat and noise, packed with life, voices, chaos. Out here, the world feels muted. The town stretches in both directions, muddy and grey, with the occasional patch of straw thrown over the worst ruts in the road. Your boots sink slightly as you step forward, the cold mud sucking faintly at the soles, as though it begrudges your movement. The ground doesn't care where you're going. It just reminds you, with each squelch, that you're back in reality now. The first signs of life are distant. Over the rooftops, a thin plume of smoke curls lazily from a single chimney, drifting into the pale sky, like it has nowhere important to be. Somewhere beyond the closest row of cottages, a rooster crows. It's not the triumphant Hollywood version of a morning wake-up call, It's scratchy, uneven, and half-hearted, like even the rooster isn't entirely happy to greet the new day. You glance down the street and spot faint movement. A merchant bent beneath the weight of a sack, muttering to himself as he navigates the uneven terrain. A dog darts across the path ahead, its skinny frame weaving quickly into the alleys, which are already collecting their first shadows of the day. Behind you, the tavern creaks faintly, as though reluctant to let the last of the night's energy escape entirely. Its heavy thatched roof, dusted with morning damp, hunches low over its squat walls, holding its secrets carefully within. For a moment, it strikes you just how different stepping outside feels. The warmth, the noise, the blurred faces of the crowd. It's all behind that door now. And though you may have been just another body crammed into its smoky embrace last night, there's something about leaving that makes you realize how fully alive the tavern felt. Out here, by comparison, the town is still waking, its pace slowed by the cold and the soft resistance of the mud. The space behind those walls was more than shelter. It was a refuge. The tavern offered a much-needed respite from the hardships of medieval existence. For all its grime and seemingly endless chaos, it gave people something rare in a world where survival often left little room for joy, a chance to connect. Inside, strangers shared benches, mugs, and moments they otherwise never would have. Farmers rubbed elbows with craftsmen, travellers swapped rumours with townsfolk, and even the occasional noble might have dropped their guard long enough to laugh at a bawdy joke. And for a few fleeting hours, none of it felt out of place. The tavern was a beating heart of the community, where stories and lives collided in a way that felt chaotic but never aimless. It wasn't perfect, of course. The night had its share of drawn-out arguments, mug-slam disagreements, and that one guy whose boasts about his wrestling skills just got louder with each drink. But those same moments, the mess, the laughter, the half-hearted anger, they built something. It wasn't about resolving differences or walking away with new friendships. It was simpler than that. It was about existing together, no matter how broken or noisy it got. For all its flaws, the tavern wasn't just a place to drink. It was a shared space where social classes blurred, grudges softened, and survival didn't feel quite so heavy for a few hours. Your boots make small, wet sucking sounds as you pick your way down the road, passing a cluster of low buildings with thatched roofs nearly as weather-worn as the tavern itself. The faint hum of the town waking up brushes against your ears now. A child, standing just outside a doorway, starts stacking small bundles of firewood against the wall, their motions sharp and mechanical, as though they've done it 1,000 times. A cart creaks by, its wheels skewing dangerously in the mud as its driver mutters curses under his breath, too low for you to catch fully. And still, against all this outward quiet, the echoes of the tavern stick with you. The warmth of last night's fire, the faces softened by flickering light, the tangle of laughter rising and falling like waves. It all feels closer than the present moment, impossibly vivid despite being over. You can't help but think about what the tavern gave to everyone inside. It wasn't just ale or a space to trade complaints about turnips or livestock on the brink of death, although there was some of that too. It was a pause, not forever, but long enough. Long enough to forget, maybe even just for an hour, that the roads outside were dangerous, that the fields would still need tilling tomorrow, that the debt collector might still come knocking by week's end. The tavern wasn't an escape. It never claimed to erase those burdens. But within its walls, there was relief, warmth, and the stubborn reminder that life doesn't always have to be survival alone. You notice the buzz of the waking town picking up just slightly. A smith's hammer rings out faintly from farther down the road, its rhythmic clanging almost hypnotic in the way it cuts the stillness. Somewhere nearby, hens rustle noisily, squawking and scratching like unruly children who don't yet know the meaning of discipline. The sound rips briefly through the moment before being swallowed again by the quiet hum of daily life creeping back into focus. It's strange how alive everything feels despite the lingering cold, despite the mud weighing each step. The tavern stands firmly behind you now, its entrance nothing more than a faint outline when you glance back over your shoulder. In daylight, it looks older, smaller even, though no less sturdy. But its sturdiness feels different now. It's not just a building. You realize it's something more, an anchor for the town and a testament to the stubbornness of community. The tavern was a window into a world that was both foreign and relatable. People emerged from it battered but alive, equal parts worn down and lifted up by the shared weight of its laughter, brawls and stories. Somehow, it managed to hold all of that inside while staying rooted firmly in the here and now. The muddy road beneath your feet feels softer now, as if months of traffic and rain have turned it into something closer to clay. The sun peeks faintly over the horizon, its weak light barely strong enough to push back the night's chill, but enough to outline the skeletons of rooftops and trees beyond the town's edge. There's a pull in that direction, toward whatever comes next, but something keeps you tethered to the echoes of the night behind you. It's not regret, not quite, just the quiet realization that these moments don't happen everywhere. The tavern wasn't just a destination. It was an experience, messy and fleeting, but undeniably alive. As you turn back to the road, the last strains of the tavern fade fully behind you, but they don't really leave. You carry them instead, tucked somewhere among the mud-stained soles of your boots and the lingering haze of straw in your clothes. You feel it in the dull ache of your body and the faint warmth still clinging to your chest. It's a softness, not peace exactly, and certainly not comfort, but a space where life pushed a little lighter, breathing alongside the constant weight of whatever came next. The tavern didn't erase or transform the world outside. It just served as its reminder that in a time of survival, there was still room for connection. And you were there, part of it. A place of survival, community, fleeting joy, and memories you might not fully grasp until you're far from the weight of today. The medieval tavern wasn't just a place to drink. It was a lifeline, a space where survival met connection, where stories grew from rumor to myth, and where people escaped the cold realities of the world outside. Under its thatched roof, laughter, arguments, and untold tales built a fragile but persistent sense of belonging. Boasts became ballads, and mishaps transformed into myths, all within its smoky walls. Next time you raise a glass, take a moment to imagine the stories it could tell. Thanks for spending the evening with us, and all the echoes of one long past night. See you next time.